Hello again, this is Dr. Lindsay. And in this video, I want to go through the components of aggregate demand that Keynes came up with. So remember, Keynes said he thought the problem in the economy is there's a lack of demand. People just aren't buying enough stuff. So then the question is, well, what constitutes aggregate demand? Who's doing the purchases? Out of GDP, that's all the stuff that's produced, where is it going? Who's buying it? And so he broke down all the different components of aggregate demand. So broke down the components. And I'm just going to write AD for aggregate demand. Who's buying the goods? And he thought that a lot of the stuff that's produced is just purchased by people to consume. It's referred to as consumption with a big capital C. These are the things that consumers buy: food, clothing, cars, pizza, food, clothing. So some of it literally is consumed. Cars, pizzas. This is the bulk of GDP. It's purchased by people to use, and it's just used up shortly in a few years. The next big category of GDP is investment. Now, this isn't the type of investment we think of buying stocks and bonds. This is investment in capital goods. It's investing in producer goods, the things that companies buy to make more goods. So this is things like factories. They're not consumed by people. You can think of them as producer goods, the things that sellers need to make more stuff. This is machines. You can think of this as the pizza ovens, not the pizzas. The pizzas are going to be up here in consumption. The pizza ovens are going to be a capital good used to make more pizzas. And when we're making pizza ovens, we can think of that as investment. Also included in this is new homes, by the way. They're included in the category of investment spending, probably because they last so long. But we don't include things like stocks and bonds. Investment are things that increase the capital stock. In our production function, the amount we produce depends on how much people we have, how much human capital, how much physical capital, how much technology. Well, investment goods increases that stock of physical capital so that we can produce more. The next big category, government purchases, because some of GDP is purchased and used by the government. And the symbol for that is G. So these are purchases by the government. And this will be things like tanks, planes, ships, bridges, roads, salaries for park rangers and soldiers. It does not include transfer payments. So it does not include transfer payments. Transfer payments are where we're just taking money really and giving it to somebody else, like Social Security. So people that are working pay into it, and then that money is just given to retired folks to take. And by the way, when you think you're putting money into Social Security for the future, if you think that that money is going into a special pot and saved for your retirement, it's not. it's going to pay older people that are collecting Social Security right now. It's called a pay-as-you-go system. And sometimes people say, well, they really want their money that goes in Social Security invested in stocks, things like that go up. Can't happen because they don't have that money to invest. It'd be nice if they took that money aside and invested it. That's what they use to pay you when you retire, but that's not the way it works. So, okay, this doesn't include transfer payments like Social Security. And the fourth category, if this is an open economy, and an open economy means we're trading with other countries. A closed economy means that there is no trading with other countries. If it's an open economy, then some of the goods we produce are going to foreigners. But then we're getting some of the goods that the foreigners are producing. So we use not just exports, but net exports, which is exports minus imports. So exports minus imports. And we abbreviate that with X minus M, or net exports. So sometimes you'll see it as X minus M. Sometimes people will write it as NX for net exports. Usually net exports are pretty close to zero. They balance out for the most part. The biggest category of where GDP goes is in consumption. And then investment is something like 15% of GDP, 15-20%, and government purchases are somewhere around 15 to 20%. They're much smaller. I'll show you a graph. So here's a graph of how much is in each category. And you can see their consumption. This is a graph from like 1945 to 2010. Consumption ranges somewhere around 70%. Here on this graph, 60 to 70% of what's produced is just consumed by people that purchase it. Then somewhere here around 15% to 20% down there is government expenditures and investment. And it's interesting to see that even though it seems like government expenditures are always going up and down, they seem to be pretty flat there at around 20% of the economy. Net exports down there is the smallest category, and it's pretty near zero, unless we're running some sort of trade deficit or trade surplus. Usually we're running a trade deficit, but it's still not that much of a category of GDP. So according to Keynes, what constitutes this aggregate demand that runs out or there's not enough of sometimes, and then there's a recession or a depression because people aren't buying enough? Well, according to him, aggregate demand then is going to be consumption plus investment spending plus government spending plus net exports, X minus M. Add all of them up, and that's aggregate demand in the economy. Now, according to Keynes, what's in equilibrium? Economists always have to have an equilibrium. So where is equilibrium? Well, in supply and demand model, it's where quantity supplied is equal to quantity demanded. So that's the equilibrium, where quantity supplied is equal to quantity demanded. Quantity supplied is what the economy produces. So we can write that down as just production. The production of goods and services equals the quantity demanded. The quantity demanded is aggregate demand, which are all this is all the spending on the economy. So expenditures, which is aggregate demand, or spending in the economy. So that would be the equilibrium, where the total amount of spending is equal to the total amount that's produced. And the amount we produce in the economy is real output, which is real GDP, And the symbol for that is Y, real output. So we can write this then, that real output Y is equal to all the expenditures of aggregate demand, and that's consumption plus investment plus government spending plus net imports, net exports. This is a real important equation in macroeconomics. It's the equilibrium here, this Keynesian equilibrium for the economy. We got to have an equilibrium. The economy will get to an equilibrium quickly, right where expenditures are equal to production. So what happens if we're at equilibrium and spending goes up? So if expenditures increase, what's going to happen? Spending goes up, well, the businesses start producing more. They see people buying their products and they start producing more. They start hiring more people, unemployment goes down, production goes up. So businesses produce more. And output, real GDP increases. So this part on the right-hand side, aggregate demand goes up, and to be in equilibrium, Y then has to go up. Otherwise, we're not in equilibrium. Now, if expenditures decrease or spending goes down, what's going to happen? Businesses find out that they can't sell their products. So they lay people off and they produce less. So they can't sell as much. They produce less because they can't sell their products. They lay people off, reduce their number of employees. And output drops. So why? Real GDP falls and unemployment goes up. So according to Keynes here, our output, our GDP here, real GDP, is dependent on spending. Spending goes up, GDP goes up. Spending goes down, GDP falls. So if we're in a recession, real GDP has fallen, it's because spending has fallen, expenditures have fallen. Aggregate demand has fallen. And so if aggregate demand there, spending falls, then we're not in equilibrium anymore. And the only way we're going to get in equilibrium is if Y drops. And that will continue, Y will continue to drop until we're at equilibrium, where both sides of that equation are the same. Where once again, production will meet expenditures. So over here we got, here's production, here's spending. Spending goes up, production goes up. Spending falls, production falls, or GDP falls. So spending is happening, going up, and we're out of equilibrium. To get to equilibrium, output has to go up. So spending is controlling everything. It's controlling GDP. Hence, that is why Keynes was saying that the recession are caused by a lack of demand in the economy. Completely different than the economists before him that said supply creates its own demand. It's like, okay, if that was kind of like, well, the Field of Dreams in the movie, if you build it, they will come. The thinking was, well, like if you make something, somebody's going to buy it. So now we're looking at it from the other side. They're saying that, first you make something, people will buy it. Keynes say no, people start buying stuff, and then it'll be made. And many economists feel this is right, that recessions are caused most likely by a lack of aggregate demand. One Nobel Prize winning economist said not too long ago that recessions are really just a lack of confidence. People have less confidence and they cut back on their spending. And consumption drops. And businesses cut back on their spending. And investment category drops. So people decide they're not buying cars. Or they're going to buy less cars. Maybe they're a little concerned about whether they're going to have a job in the future. And they cut off buying of cars. So consumption drops. They cut off buying homes, and investment spending drops, and aggregate demand drops, and then output drops in the economy. Now, just because we're at equilibrium doesn't mean we're at full employment. Doesn't mean we're on the edge of the PPF. The economists before Keynes felt that if we're inside the PPF, right here, in a recession or depression, it's just temporary. Because we're going to move out to the edge of the PPF at full employment. You just give the economy a little time. Law of supply and demand. Prices will drop and we'll be at equilibrium. So this is the classical or pre-Keynesian equilibrium point, being on the edge of the PPF. And the economy will get there all by itself without any government intervention. In fact, the best thing to do is just leave the economy alone. Don't fiddle with it with any kind of government intervention, and the economy will get out to that edge of the PPF. That's the equilibrium point. If we're not there, we're just out of equilibrium. But now Keynes said something different. He said that equilibrium is where aggregate demand, spending equals output. That's the equilibrium. And that equilibrium could be anywhere. It could be here, inside the PPF, in a depression. That's an equilibrium. It could be on the PPF. It could be anywhere. It could be outside the PPF. So any of these is a Keynesian equilibrium. Could be, as long as y equals c plus I plus g, we're at equilibrium. And his thinking was that we would probably get to that equilibrium pretty quickly. Once people stop spending their money, businesses respond quickly. They stop producing things right away and lay people off. As soon as people start spending money again, then the businesses start producing things very quickly and hiring people quickly. So we thought we got to an equilibrium pretty quickly. It wouldn't take too long. But once we're there at equilibrium, we could be there for a long time. He said, yeah, in the long run, yeah, we'll be out at full employment. But the short run, we could be at some equilibrium in a depression, and it could last a long time. The classical thinking is if we're in a depression, the government shouldn't do anything. Let the economy get back to full employment all by itself. Keynes advocated government intervention. something to increase aggregate demand. Because without an increase in aggregate demand, we could be in a depression for a long time. Maybe this depression will last 20 years. So Keynes is thinking here, we need to increase aggregate demand somehow. You got to get C up, you got to get Y up, I up, you got to get G up, or something, one of those has to go up. And his thinking was the simplest is just increase G. Have the government go out and start spending money on things. He also had another idea that you could drop taxes, lower taxes, and then people have more money to spend. I mean, there's only two things or a few things you can do with your money, after tax income, spend it or save it. But the amount that you have to spend, which is called disposable income, is your after tax income, and that depends how much taxes are. So he was thinking also that the government could lower people's taxes, and then they would have more of this disposable income, and they could go out and spend more, and that would increase aggregate demand. So Keynes's recommendation: government spending. Government spending. That will increase aggregate demand. But his idea really was just increase aggregate demand somehow. But he thought the easiest way to do it is just have the government go out and start spending more money. Or have the government lower taxes. We use big T as the abbreviation for taxes. So decrease taxes or increase spending will increase aggregate demand. And then we could move back towards that full employment position on the PPF much faster than what otherwise happened. Big departure from the economists before him. So previous economists said in a recession or depression, do nothing. No government intervention. Keynes's recommendation: have the government increase aggregate demand. Governments can increase aggregate demand. Spend money or lower taxes. That'll increase aggregate demand and push us back up to the edge of the PPF. Now, there's lots of people who don't like Keynes's ideas and think that they are incorrect. Some economists feel that having the government just go out and start spending money, party, getting everyone to spend to get us back to where we should be, isn't the right way to do things. But it does seem to work. There does seem to be some evidence that changes in government spending and changes in the tax rate does affect the economy and GDP. You would think that we would know exactly 70 years later how much it affects the economy or how well it affects the economy. Not really. All I can say is for most countries, most of the time, it does seem to have an effect. It's not all just smoke and mirrors. How much of an effect it has depends on the situation, but it does seem to work to some degree.